Hey there, tonight we step into a different kind of tale. Not a polished legend, but the stark, weighty reality beneath the shining armour. There are no dragons here, nor flawless champions. Instead there is a life shaped by duty, shadowed by fear, marked by bruises, and carried by the quiet persistence of survival, all within the confines of steel. They march through battlefields, endure restless nights, and watch as the brilliance of glory slowly fades. If stories like this bring them ease, they might consider liking the video and subscribing, but only if it genuinely soothes their mind. And if they'd like, they can leave a comment sharing where they're listening from and what time it is. There's something oddly comforting about knowing others are also drifting off to this slow, thoughtful journey through the past. So they can dim the lights, let their imagination kindle warmth against the cold stone walls, get comfortable, and begin with the forging of a knight. Their journey starts at the age of 7, not with the swing of a sword, but with a quiet goodbye. Their parents, proud and maybe even quietly relieved, send them away to live in a noble household. There are no parting letters sealed with wax, no treasured keepsakes, just a gentle pat on the shoulder, a small bundle of clothing, and the heavy weight of expectation resting on their still growing shoulders. Readiness is never questioned. It doesn't matter. They are a page now. The castle stands vast before them, its grey towers rising into the sky, promising both greatness and hardship. As the gates creak open, what waits inside is not a realm of honour, but days filled with chores, obedience, and quiet endurance. Chivalry will come later, much later, after years spent fetching, cleaning, and tending to temperamental horses and equally moody lords. Their tasks seem endless. From the break of dawn to far past dusk, they rush from corridor to corridor, delivering messages, sweeping halls, and serving food. On rare occasions they're allowed to polish armour, though that task quickly loses its glamour when they find themselves scraping caked mud and crusted dung from iron boots. Their palms blister, their backs throb. The knights barely spare them a glance. They are not knights, not yet. They are merely servants. But slowly the training begins. Wooden swords are passed around like cleaning tools, and bruises bloom across their arms as they spar with other boys just as eager to prove themselves. They learn to fall from horses and do it often. At times it feels like falling is the only lesson that matters. No one praises them for bruising well, but signs of weakness draw swift reprimands. They come to understand pain is to be endured, not shown. Discipline rules all. They speak only when addressed, bow deeper to anyone of higher rank, and obey commands, no matter how petty or humiliating. Errors are corrected either with the sting of a slap or a week spent scrubbing the filthiest corners of the keep. Chamber pots were part of daily chores. When one boy failed to remove his cap in the presence of the lady of the house, he spent the next 2 days on his knees in the chapel, praying for humility. That sort of mistake wasn't repeated. If their family held wealth, a tutor might be provided, one who taught reading, writing, and perhaps a little Latin, although the Latin mostly seemed relevant only during Mass or when reading tomb inscriptions. Without such privilege, they learned through observation. They listened intently, memorized prayers, and practiced writing letters with trembling fingers, provided the steward was kind enough to offer a scrap of parchment. Literacy was a privilege, not a right. Physical strength and strict obedience were more valued. Still, they learned. They learned which fork to place beside a dish, even though most still preferred to eat with their hands. They discovered how to stand motionless during lengthy banquets, carefully balancing trays of steaming food, while the nobility discussed politics and grumbled about the wine. They picked up the habit of vanishing quietly when tensions rose, and fully disappeared when intoxicated knights began recounting tales of old battles. Every minute became part of a quiet education in endurance. Each day began with morning mass. The castle chapel remained cold all year, and their breath hung in the air as they knelt on unyielding stone floors, struggling to remain awake through the sacred rituals. Faith was not a personal choice. It was woven into their training just like swordplay. They were taught to dread the fires of hell, to hold reverence for the church, and to confess their sins regularly. The priests spoke of divine mission, of holy purpose, and they nodded along while battling sleep. More than anything, they prayed not to fall ill. Remedies were scarce, and recoveries even rarer. Meals passed quickly, bread, cheese, and meat, if fortune smiled. Vegetables were eyed with suspicion. Many believed raw greens brought sickness. Thus, their daily fare often consisted of salted meat and hard crusts. They ate fast, knowing another duty awaited them immediately after. Feast days brought a break from the monotony. Roasted pig or sweet oatcakes might grace the table, and such moments stayed in memory for years, like dreams glimpsed faintly through smoke. At dusk, the great hall stirred with music. Minstrels sang of Arthur, of Roland, of saints battling dragons. They sat near the fire, just close enough to hear the words. Though the songs were meant to stir the heart, weariness often dulled the magic. Their aching feet demanded more attention than visions of chivalry. And yet something within would shift. A quiet longing, maybe, that perhaps in some distant future someone might one day sing about them. Sleep came wherever space allowed. Most nights were spent shoulder to shoulder with other boys in the servants' quarters, curled on straw pallets that reeked of dampness and old sweat. Occasionally they were roused in the middle of the night to assist with unplanned arrivals or sudden needs. They learned to rise without protest, to push through exhaustion, to mask fatigue behind steady eyes. A night, after all, must be prepared at any moment. That readiness started here. They were not alone. Other pages endured the same. Silent bonds formed. Friendships not through words, but through the quiet understanding of shared burdens. Through exchanged glances and whispered grumbles, they slowly grasped the rhythms that govern life within the castle walls. They discover which nights show cruelty and which ones turn a blind eye if an extra spoonful of stew disappears. They come to know whom to trust, whom to avoid, and which shadowy corners offer a momentary refuge from duty. There are light-hearted moments too, a joke shared by the cook, a knight stumbling over a sleepy dog, a purloined apple snatched in passing. These simple joys become precious. They remind them that, even here, beyond the weight of obligation, there remains a space for laughter, for something human. Now and then the world outside the fortress briefly reveals itself. A caravan of merchants bearing spices and silks, wandering entertainers with bright costumes, or a noblewoman riding past with her attendants. These glimpses seem like fragments of distant tales, hazy and unreachable. They do not yet belong to that realm. But perhaps one day. Sometimes doubt creeps in. The stories of honour and fame feel far away, while the pain in their limbs and the sting of hunger are all too real. They begin to wonder whether this relentless grind truly leads to knighthood. And then, as if summoned by hope, a knight rides out, armour gleaming, banner fluttering. And something stirs in their chest. That future, however distant, still calls. Their education in humility continues beyond aching bodies and growling stomachs. They are present at ceremonies, though their role remains that of silent observers, barely acknowledged. Nobles gather, cloaked in fabrics too fine for them to touch, let alone wear. Their stares, and at times their words, offer reminders of where these pages stand, somewhere between necessary and unseen. Whenever dignitaries arrive, the castle transforms into a grand stage. Guest chambers are arranged, silver is polished until it gleams, and corridors are swept again and again. If anything appears out of order, it's the pages who are blamed. And should something go awry, a visiting bishop's leg, for example, bitten by the Lord's hound, knowing how to vanish becomes essential. They quickly become skilled in the quiet art of seeming occupied while staying well away from any unfolding trouble. On feast days, the air fills with music and dancing, with goblets of wine raised high, though only the grown-ups indulge. The pages linger near the edges, absorbing the sights and melodies, doing their best not to appear too enchanted. Every so often a kind hand offers a piece of cake or a honeyed sweet. For that moment their burdens grow lighter. Yet those gestures, kind though they are, don't erase the truth. Their place is to watch, to serve, and to remember. A few fortunate ones escape into books, provided they can read. The steward's private chamber guards a small trove of manuscripts, bound in worn leather, protected as jealously as the armoury itself. On rare nights they may be allowed to sit close to the hearth, listening as an elder scribe reads aloud tales of ancient Roman commanders or saints who suffered trials beyond imagining. These stories nourish the spirit while the body recovers from the day's toil. Warnings circulate too. In quiet murmurs or half-heard sentences they learn of those who did not endure, boys who broke under pressure, who were sent away in shame, or who simply vanished without explanation. Eavesdropping often reveals what they were never meant to hear. They soon master the timing of a nod, the wisdom of silence, and the importance of keeping one's gaze low. The castle becomes their forge. Each passing hour shapes them, makes them tougher, more aware, more resilient. They are not yet knights, but they are no longer children. They are beings in the midst of transformation, shaped by hardship, honed by discipline, and quietly holding on to resolve. So when they lie awake at night, eyes fixed on the wooden beams above their straw-filled bedding, their minds drift not only to what they've endured, but to the road still ahead, the next level, the next trial, the next careful step along the path which, if the gods their lord and their body allow, might one day lead them to knighthood. For now, though, they remain pages, and for the moment that is enough. At 14, the identity of page is officially left behind, though the transition comes without warmth or ceremony. They are now squires. While the title may sound like an elevation, it often means fewer treats and significantly more bruises. Their days no longer revolve around scrubbing floors but tending armour, no longer fetching goblets but fetching wounded men. Their new post is deeply personal. They are matched to a knight and expected to serve him as faithfully as his own shadow. Wherever he rides, they must follow. If he charges into chaos, they run after him. And should he fall, they are expected to dive into the fray to lift him, even if it means gambling with their own life. They are no longer merely a child roaming castle halls. They are now attached to a warrior, and their days bend around his needs. The physical demands increase sharply. Riding a warhorse, for example, turns out to be nothing like the smooth gallop they once imagined. These creatures are massive, bred for strength and battle, and more ill-tempered than most lords. Just climbing into the saddle becomes a minor contest. Controlling the beast is a constant negotiation of wills. Their thighs burn, their spine jars with every jolt, and their backside hasn't felt normal since Michaelmas. Swordplay becomes more serious. Now they train with real blades, not to draw blood, but sharp enough to make mistakes painful. Their opponents may be better rested, more focused, or simply stronger, and they must endure the bruises to prove their worth. Training is relentless. New bruises bloom before the old ones can fade. Each session is a quiet lesson in humility. For every strike they manage to land, they take 3 in return. The knight they serve expects no elegance, only endurance. And yet perhaps the most exhausting part of their role lies in tending to gear. Armour, they quickly find, is more than metal. It's a living system, filled with sweat, grime, and even the occasional slug hiding in the crevices of plate joints. They must scrub, polish, inspect each strap and hinge. If the greaves pinch or the helmet visor jams mid-fight, that fault lies with them. Should their knight perish due to a missed buckle or cracked strap, they'd likely wish to vanish along with him. Weapons require daily attention. Blades must be honed, lances tested, shields checked for hairline splits. Their knight's safety and their own standing depends on meticulous work. Precision is everything, and though no one applauds when the equipment performs flawlessly, everyone notices when it fails. And then, of course, there are the tournaments. Tournaments had once been idealized, back when they were still pages, filled with trumpets, ribbons, and adoring onlookers. But things look different now. Now they're the ones tightening saddles, carrying lances, wiping blood from a knight's cheek so he can flash a victorious smile to the crowd. If the knight emerges triumphant, they gather the prize. If he falls, they gather what's left of him. Bruised ribs and battered pride. When real war comes, and it always comes, they march beside their knight through mud, rain, and doubt. Campaigns drag on endlessly. Comfort is rare. Meals are sparse. Sleep, even more so. The armour, assuming they even have any, scrapes and presses against their skin in painful places they never knew could ache. Only then do they begin to understand what true exhaustion feels like, when each step is taken not from strength but obligation. The battlefield strips away illusions. There's no glory in it, only chaos, cries torn by the wind, blades clashing, bodies colliding, blood and sweat merging into a stench that clings. They hear the sudden hush that follows a death. and these harsh lessons become their daily instruction. They start to recognize the difference between fear that sharpens instincts and fear that locks the body in place. And they silently hope it's the former that greets them more often. They're not yet there to fight, not officially, but that doesn't shield them from danger. When the knight is thrown from his horse, it's their job to reach him, to lift him, drag him out of peril. Picture pulling a fully armoured man, every segment heavier than a feast day ham, across a field soaked with mud while arrows whistle down like rain. It isn't noble, it's punishing. And the reward? Usually it's simply getting to do it again tomorrow. If the knight suffers wounds, they tend to him. If he's taken captive, it's often the squire who must negotiate or act as messenger to secure his release, even if that means confronting men who would rather let him rot. There's no tutor guiding their diplomacy. Necessity does the teaching. Their words are chosen with care. Their posture is lowered in respect. Their tone softens. Even silence becomes a strategic tool. Occasionally they feel something close to pride. It comes when they lead their knight's horse into camp and heads turn. Or when their knight, bloodied but standing, gives them a wordless nod after battle. Those moments pass quickly, like light slipping through narrow slits in the wall. But they linger in memory. They're enough to keep going. Back at the castle, the cycle continues. They train the new pages, passing on the same hard-earned wisdom. They assist during feasts, coordinate hunting parties, and remain close by whenever important visitors arrive. Their sword shows wear. Their boots are cracked. They move with the stiffness of someone twice their age. Yet they no longer resemble a mere servant. They are being assessed, their readiness, their resolve, their worth. The priests still expect devout prayers. Their lord still demands unwavering loyalty. Their body still pleads for rest, a request rarely granted. But retreat is no longer an option. The only path left is the one ahead. And so they begin to wonder about their own coat of arms, what colours it might bear, what symbols would speak for them. Quietly they dream of the day, the moment when the ritual of dubbing, the sword gently tapping their shoulders, the moment when they no longer rise as squires, but as knights. It seems impossibly distant, it seems destined, somehow it feels like both. But there are difficult days, days when they must bury a fellow squire, crushed beneath a warhorse or pierced by a lance whose tip looked a bit too sharp. No songs are sung for squires. No verses are written for boys who nearly became something more. They learn to carry grief silently, to keep their hands moving, even when the world feels like it's shifting beneath their feet. If fortune favours them, their knight teaches more than just the art of war. He teaches how to think, how to judge another's intentions, how to assess a battlefield, and how to lead others with care. If he is wise, he imparts lessons on when to speak, and when silence holds more value, when to fight, and when surrender holds dignity. These are things no armour can shield, and yet they matter just as deeply. Winter brings fresh trials. They now know that a sword is only as useful as the hand still warm enough to grip it. Their fingers split in the cold, and each morning the knight's armour feels like solid ice as they fasten each buckle. The snow turns the training yard into a pit of frozen slush. The horses stumble. So do they. Complaints have no place here. Weather, like warfare, does not bend to emotion. Among the older squires there is talk. Whispers of glory, distant rebellions in the east, of royal summons. They listen, they gather details, they quietly calculate. Experience has taught them that glory and graveyards are often separated by inches. Still, if summoned, they would ride at dawn. The waiting gnaws more than the war. They write their first letter. It feels stiff, overly formal, addressed to parents who may no longer live where memory left them. It says little, and yet it matters. The act of writing anchors them. It reminds them there is still a self beneath the bruises, the grit, the rust-stained steel. One night after a feast, their knight, softened by mead and distant memories, speaks of his first campaign. He describes the downpour, the gnaw of hunger, the rush of surviving that first charge. Then his voice fades. He looks into the flames and names 3 men who never returned. They do not interrupt. Their place is to listen and to remember. Each day they practice, sometimes in shadows, mirroring the way their knight stands, how he shifts his weight before striking. They copy his grip, his footwork, the subtle lift of his blade. They bleed, they limp, they absorb. And then one morning, without ceremony, their name is spoken. They are to ride alongside their knight, not as a watcher, but as his second. There is no sleep the night before. None is needed. As they mount their horse, they feel prepared. Not flawless, not unafraid, but ready. Their tale is still unfolding, yet already it's been etched into the iron of their blade, into the dust clinging to well-travelled roads, into the hardened calluses of their hands. They are no longer boys and not quite men, but they are closer now. They are squires and they are becoming. At 21, or near enough, some are knighted earlier, some later, yet the age means far less than the decision itself. Someone with authority has judged them ready to kneel, ready to swear, and, at least in principle, prepared to kill and to die, now with a ceremonial blessing to mark the moment. There's no sudden change. They do not wake with a deeper voice or a sterner gaze. They remain sore from yesterday's training, with mud still clinging to their boots, and a fading scar across the shoulder that refuses to heal. But this is the moment, the one their entire youth has bent toward. Their body bruised, their pride weathered, their hands toughened through years of polishing, sharpening, hauling, and serving. All of it leads here, to the day of their knighthood. It begins in solitude. They are led to a bare chamber, cold, quiet, where they are to pray, reflect, and fast through the night. There is no splendour, only stone walls, a single candle, and a thin, scratchy blanket placed near the altar. The air is chill. The silence heavy. They kneel, bones aching, stomachs restless, trying not to think about the warmth from the kitchens or the scent of roast pork drifting up from below. The vigil is meant to purify, to prepare the spirit for sacred duty. They are asked to contemplate what lies ahead, defending the vulnerable, serving their Lord, upholding the faith. In truth, they spend as much time wondering whether anyone would notice if they sat down briefly or took a quiet sip of water. They are not alone in this discomfort. Countless squires before them have kept such vigils, some trembling with expectation, others masking unease beneath calm expressions. They wonder which type they appear to be. They try to recall every prayer, every creed, every posture drilled into memory. They push away thoughts of whispered stories, of squires fainting mid-kneel or growing sick with nerves during the rite. That would be memorable, certainly, but not ideal. When morning comes, they are led to the great hall. It has been dressed for ceremony. Banners hang from high beams. Candles flicker in the early light. Nobles, knights, and priests gather in ornate garments, whispering softly behind gloves and sleeves. As they enter, a hush falls. Their name is spoken aloud. They kneel. Their lord, or perhaps the king, depending on birth and standing, approaches, bearing a sword. It is not always the Lord's own blade. Often it is a ceremonial weapon, polished to a mirror's gleam, never stained by blood, held only for moments such as this. They try not to stare too hard. They try not to tremble. The sword taps each shoulder, left, then right. The dubbing. In certain customs there comes also a symbolic strike, not a blow of violence, but a firm touch. A gesture meant to remind them that pain, physical, moral, spiritual, is part of their path and must be borne without complaint. A knight, after all, is not promised ease, only sacrifice. Then comes the oath. With care they speak the ancient vows, pledging loyalty to their liege, to God, and to the code of chivalry. They swear to defend the weak, protect women, tell the truth, and fight with honour. Each word is said with quiet weight. Though somewhere deep inside, they wonder how many truly still live by such promises. With the oath, it is done. They stand, no longer boys, no longer mere attendants, but now as knights, The transformation is quiet, inward, yet undeniably real. People who barely noticed them the day before now offer solemn nods. Fellow squires give congratulatory claps on the back. Their lord, with a restrained smile, offers what passes in noble circles as high praise. There might be a feast, depending on the wealth of their lord or the court's prevailing mood. If so, they find themselves seated slightly higher at the table, drinking from a finer goblet, accepting nods of recognition from nobles to whom they once served wine. Some receive knighthood amid blood and chaos, hastily knighted on muddy battlefields. Others are honoured with ceremony and splendour. Yet regardless of the setting, the title arrives with weight, settling over their shoulders like freshly donned chainmail. What they soon realise is that knighthood is not an end point, it is an opening. The world offers no pause for reflection, no time to savour the title. The duties come swiftly. They are now expected to guide rather than follow, to decide rather than await orders, to lead from the front and not trail behind. The very sword that tapped their shoulder is now theirs to wield, and no one will review their decisions anymore. Should they make a mistake, it will be visible, it will be costly. Their new rank carries greater expectations. A knight's word is binding. Their signature seals matters. Their presence is expected at court. Their absence is remarked upon. Their place in church is assumed. Too much drink, a careless phrase. These things reflect not just upon them, but upon their household, their crest, and their liege. A misstep in speech can strain delicate alliances. A drunken quarrel might unravel diplomacy, carefully arranged over months. The moment that blade brushed their shoulder, the space for error became narrow, and the scope of duty stretches beyond the battlefield. If granted land, they must now govern, collecting rents, resolving disputes between tenants, maintaining roads, and securing good harvests. While knights are often imagined as fighters and little more, reality paints them also as stewards, as justices, and as landholders. Their sword may remain sheathed for weeks, yet their seal is pressed into wax daily. And now they have a squire of their own. The irony is gentle, not lost on them. This boy, uncertain and earnest, shadows their every move. They teach him how to buff metal without leaving streaks, how to saddle a warhorse without causing discomfort, and how to pour wine with steady hands. Corrections begin softly, but become firmer over time. He reminds them of who they once were. It's humbling, and quietly amusing, to recognise the long road already travelled, and the even longer one still ahead. There is one more task, choosing a coat of arms. If they didn't already have one, it must now be declared. Its colours, symbols, and motto. These are not mere decorations. They become a voice that speaks in battle and at court, long before the knight utters a word. A crimson lion rearing on a golden field proclaims something very different than a black. A cross on a white bend. The symbol must be chosen wisely. Or perhaps they hire a herald to assist. Their new armour is fitted specifically to their body, provided their lord is generous or their family still has coin left to spare. Full plate does not come cheap. Each section must be made to measure. Greaves shaped to their legs, gauntlets fitted for the hands, and a cuirass moulded across the chest. They stand still while the blacksmiths measure and murmur, soot-covered fingers brushing their arms, leaving black smudges behind. The armour's weight is striking. Walking in it feels like learning how to move all over again. Yet inside it, they feel a strange comfort, as if the steel protects not just their limbs, but their reputation. They take their first formal ride through the village, no longer trailing behind a noble's retinue, but leading it. Children dash to the roadside, old men offer stiff bows, a woman tosses them a flower. They try not to appear too pleased. The peasants don't exactly cheer, but they watch. And in the medieval world, being noticed is a form of respect. That night, alone in their chamber, they remove the armour piece by piece, slowly, deliberately. The sword is placed with care. They gaze into the reflection on polished metal, trying to see what others saw that day. A knight, a protector, a leader. They don't quite believe it yet, but they will. Not everything shifts in a single moment. The training continues. Mornings still begin with prayer, they still ache after long rides, still wince when a blade taps the elbow just wrong. But their name, when called, now carries weight. They are asked for counsel, not simply commanded. The youngest squires glance at them with what might be awe, or perhaps a touch of fear. and war they know will return. When it does, their place will be at the front, no longer protected behind a shield wall, no longer waiting to be told. They will be expected to charge first, to raise their voice above the noise, to lead across the field. Should fate be kind, they may return with glory. If not, their banner will ride home without them. This is the cost of the accolade. This is the weight of the vow. And yet they feel proud, not of rank, not of titles, but of having endured the years of toil, the sleepless vigils, the shame, the drills, the fear. Now the title clings to them like a second skin. They are a knight, and their true service has only just begun. One does not become a knight and instantly feel powerful. One becomes a knight and is promptly handed 60 pounds of steel and told to climb atop a horse. The first true lesson of knighthood is not combat. It is learning to stand, to breathe, and to stay upright without toppling beneath the weight of one's own armour. At first it begins with chainmail, a net of linked metal rings that drapes over their body like a tunic made of iron. It's not quite as heavy as it looks, but it tugs at the limbs, clings to skin, and soaks up every drop of sweat the body can offer. Beneath it they wear a padded gambeson, stitched layers of linen, stuffed with wool or whatever rags can be found. It traps warmth, it absorbs pain, and after even one skirmish, it reeks. After a week it becomes almost unbearable, but it prevents the mail from scraping against their skin like a coarse grater. As warfare shifts, so too does their equipment. Plate armour gradually begins to take the place of chain, starting with a breastplate and greaves, followed by pauldrons for the shoulders, vambraces guarding the forearms, sabatons shielding the feet. Articulated joints, riveted pieces, each added with the hope of offering protection without restriction, though somehow they almost always succeed in doing both at once. Eventually they are wrapped head to toe in steel, and it no longer feels like wearing clothing, but more like being folded into a moving bell. The helmet is the most burdensome. It dulls hearing, limits vision, and fogs with every breath. On the battlefield, it guards their skull. Beyond it, it mostly delivers a persistent headache. Some helmets include visors that can be lifted, offering momentary relief for breathing, or spitting, but at the risk of exposing one's face to incoming blades. In armour, there are always trade-offs. Surprisingly, movement is not entirely lost. With proper training, they can run, crouch, mount a horse, and even roll. But none of it is effortless. They are not nimble. They are measured. Every motion is considered, preserved like coins in a dwindling pouch. Because if their foe wears only boiled leather, he will dart like a shadow while they resemble a slow-moving statue of St. George. Then comes the upkeep. Every plate must be cleaned, oiled, and checked. A single rusted rivet can seize a joint. A dented breastplate may fail under a second strike. Their squire turns into a makeshift blacksmith, scrubbing, polishing, hammering long after sunset. Should he miss a strap or misalign a buckle on the cuirass, they will know, instantly and uncomfortably. And of course, there are the weapons. Their sword remains ever by their side, not their only weapon, but the most constant. It is not the slim rapier conjured by modern fancy, but a broader, heavier blade made for slashing, not dancing. The edge is honed, but not delicate. It must survive impact, not merely inflict it. Though always near, it is drawn with care. A tool as much as a symbol, and when gripped, it becomes part of their intent. Then there is the lance. No knight is complete without one. Like gills to a fish, it defines them in open warfare. The lance is no elegant spear. It is a sharpened timber, nearly 10 feet in length, meant to be braced beneath the arm and driven forward with full gallop into the unfortunate soul waiting on the other side. In motion, it turns speed into devastation. But it's difficult to aim, easy to break, and once shattered, it's mostly useful for stirring embers at the fire. Lastly, the mace. A weapon with no grace. Short, dense, unrefined. Just a chunk of iron atop a shaft. There is no finesse, no art. Only raw force. It exists to crush helmets, shatter ribs, to finish what blades cannot. A companion for moments when all subtlety has long since left the field. The mace delivers its message with blunt certainty. Axes are similar in nature, though seen less frequently among knights, and more often in the hands of mercenaries or warriors from the northern realms. Yet, in tight combat, an axe proves its worth. It can hook a shield, cleave a helmet, or unseat a man from horseback. It lacks refinement, but then again, so does war. Shields serve a dual role, both offensive and defensive. They typically carry one shaped like a kite or a heater, slung behind their back or secured to the forearm. It bears their coat of arms, a vivid flare of colour amid the chaos of battle. They learn to strike with it, to turn away blows, to absorb the brunt of force. A well-forged shield might preserve their life. A poorly made one might be the lid to their grave. Siege engines belong to a separate world altogether. Catapults, trebuchets, battering rams. These are manned by engineers and lower-ranking soldiers. Most knights observe them from a distance. Unless by ill luck they're ordered to assist. Even then, fear does the rest. No armour deflects a falling boulder. When battle begins, their gear becomes both salvation and constraint. During the charge, they gallop with lance fixed, shield high, visor snapped shut. The world narrows, a corridor of noise and motion. Then, without warning, comes the collision. They strike, or are struck. They remain upright, or crash. If they do fall, survival may depend on someone else. Perhaps a loyal squire must drag them out before horses trample through. Should they stay mounted, the melee begins. Swords drawn, engaging man to man. It's not graceful. It's a storm of metal and breath, of cries and ringing blades. They swing, they parry, they whisper prayers. They don't aim for glory, they aim for weak spots, the gaps at the armpits, behind the knees, along the visor. Every knight has them, and if they can't locate their opponents, their own will be found. In the aftermath, assuming they live to see it, a quieter task begins. The knight becomes a craftsman of sorts. They strip off their armour, piece by piece, each dent or crack recounting a narrow escape. A snapped rivet, a torn strap. Everything is examined, logged and repaired. The sword is cleaned, re-oiled, the edge checked and honed. Every dulled weapon must be sharpened before rest is even considered, because next time, hesitation could cost a life. Gradually they begin to discern the fine differences between good steel and bad. They learn which blacksmiths to trust, the ideal balance of a blade, the weight of a reliable shield. They come to know exactly where a helmet should rest, just above the brow, never too tight. They grow particular, even meticulous, about things that once felt minor. The cut of the gauntlet leather, the way a new axe distributes its heft, the click of a visor locking shut. Some knights personalise their arms, engraved pommels, ornate crests on the cuirass, gilded edges for the wealthy or vain. They might do the same if coin and pride allow. But beneath every flourish remains one truth. Armour is not costume. It is prevention. It is a barrier between the body and the grave. There are drawbacks, naturally. Armour is costly. Much of their prize money from war or tournaments is swallowed by repairs and replacements. Then, of course, comes the heat. Marching under the summer sun in full plate feels like walking inside a furnace, especially by midday. Sweat pours. Fainting is a real risk. Flies swarm with enthusiasm, circling them like a walking roast. And yet, over time, they come to trust their gear. It becomes part of them, like an outer layer of skin. They've stood beneath arrows, felt the shock of a mace against the ribs, and known, in that moment, the armour held. It shields the body, yes. But it transforms them. They walk taller when encased in steel. People make way as they pass. Children whisper and point. Common folk offer brief bows. And yet, they understand. Armour does not grant invincibility. It only delays the inevitable. They can fight skillfully, prepare with care, and wear the finest crafted suit in all Christendom. And still they may fall to a lucky spear or an arrow that finds its mark. The tools of a knight serve only time, never certainty. At day's end, they remove their gear slowly, almost with reverence. Each buckle released, each plate lifted, makes them feel smaller, lighter, exposed. Beneath every layer they remain flesh and bone, sore, stiff and bruised. And it's in those hushed evening hours, with the sword resting across their lap and the armour cooling gently on its stand, that they begin to grasp what knighthood truly means. They are not made of steel, they simply wear it well. So every morning begins with a ritual, both familiar and solemn, lifting, tightening, adjusting. Their squire fastens the straps, hands over the gauntlets, eyes moving methodically across the armour, searching for cracks or signs of fatigue. With a quiet nod, they step once more into the shell of their calling, because no matter how weary their limbs or how many scars mark their ribs, they are still expected to ride, to raise the shield, to stand as a barrier between harm and the helpless. This is the path they've built piece by piece, plate by plate, blade by blade. This is the burden they chose, and they bear it with pride. They were once told of a code, a noble rulebook, radiant and pure. Chivalry, they called it, a word that gleamed like polished steel in the sun. A promise of what knighthood should be. Valour, courtesy, honour, the defence of the weak, devotion to the church, a shining set of ideals written in flowing script and repeated from pulpits, praised in song and sermon alike. And then came their first battle. They saw a knight, resplendent in heraldic glory, trample a man who was already fleeing. That's when they began to understand. The code was more suggestion than law. In theory, chivalry is a code of conduct, a moral compass for those who wield the sword. Rooted in Christian virtue and feudal duty, it aimed to temper bloodshed with principle. The church, ever uneasy about idle knights stirring chaos, worked hard to reshape them, to turn fighters into defenders of the faith. They were not merely to fight, but to fight justly. In practice, though, chivalry resembles a grand tapestry, striking from afar but ragged upon closer view. The tenets shift depending on who one asks, whether chronicler or clergyman. Yet some ideas endure. Protect the helpless, defend the church, serve your liege with faith, show mercy to those who surrender, speak truth, avoid unjust wars, and honour women, especially those of noble rank. It is, in essence, an admirable list, noble, aspirational, and deeply inconvenient, because when battle begins, no one pauses to recall their virtues. They swing, they survive, they follow. They follow orders even when those orders involve setting fire to a village rumoured to be disloyal. Yes, they take prisoners, but mainly because captives can be ransomed. In such cases, mercy holds a market price. Honesty is encouraged unless deceit better serves their liege. A knight may appear honourable in theory, but when land or inheritance is on the line, that honour often proves flexible. Plenty of untruths have been cloaked in noble phrases and delivered from horseback with unwavering confidence. Protecting the weak sounds noble in song, but on the ground, the weak often become collateral damage. If their lord demands that a peasant revolt be quelled, they ride without question. If a line of commoners stands between them and an enemy grain store, they don't detour. They press forward. The poor may admire knights from a distance, mostly because they are rarely better off after one passes through. Then comes the question of women. Songs tell tales of courtly affection, of brave men aching with love for noble women beyond their reach. But in truth, a knight's relationship with women is governed more by property laws than by poetry. Marriage is a political agreement. Romance, if it arises at all, is fleeting. And their willingness to protect depends, unsurprisingly, on class. A noble woman might be venerated. A washerwoman, not so much. That's not to say knights are all without conscience. Many try to live by the code. They pray. They offer tithes. They avoid cruelty when they can. But the world they inhabit does not often reward hesitation. A knight who pauses to offer mercy may not survive long enough to extend it. One who speaks plainly may lose more than just land. He may lose his head. Ironically, chivalry finds its brightest expression in tournaments. In those stage contests, the code is strict and the honour sincere. They salute their opponent. They show control. They accept defeat with grace. Yes, it is performance, but one in which the performers believe every word of the script. For a time, the ideals become real. If only for a fleeting moment, there are even manuals, actual written volumes, that spell out knightly behaviour in elaborate detail. One guide might insist that a fallen foe not be struck again if his helmet has come off. Another may advise retrieving a dropped glove for a lady, without stepping on it or staring too long at her ankles. The church, of course, has its own rules, more concerned with spiritual conduct. Attend Mass, confess regularly, resist gluttony, and above, always they are reminded who granted them the right to wield death. These manuals, recited in courts and echoed in training halls, are read aloud with solemnity. Some squires commit them to memory, others simply nod, then return quietly to sparring drills. In truth, every household interprets the code differently. Some lords place loyalty above all else, others demand sheer ruthlessness. A few take chivalry so seriously that they disown sons at the first sign of fear. Meanwhile, other nobles knight boys who've never seen a battlefield, simply to secure the right marriage. What they gradually come to understand is this: chivalry is not a sword to brandish, but a mirror. Some polish it daily, others smash it when it becomes inconvenient. They try in their own way to live by its spirit, if not its strictest rules. They assist their squire even when no one is watching. They spare a foe who surrenders, even as companions scoff. They turn their horse back toward a burning village, not to fight, but to lead a limping peasant out, because her child wraps tiny arms around their leg and whispers, "Please." These are the moments that linger longer than most victories. They cost little, and yet feel deeply ancient, even sacred. Still, no bard will ever sing of them. What they discover is that chivalry rarely lies in grand declarations. It lives instead in quiet choices, the kind made when no one sees. It's about decency within a life steeped in violence, about recognizing they are a weapon and choosing at times not to strike. But the strain never fully leaves. One day they kneel before a bishop, the next they burn down a granary. They cradle a wounded comrade in one moment, then crush a retreating footman beneath hooves the next. They sign their name under pledges of restraint, only to authorize orders that send starving men to die. And slowly they come to realize the code of chivalry is not a shield to hide behind. It is more like a compass. It cannot prevent one from losing the path. But when the fog closes in, it offers a point of reference, and on some days that is enough. In the stillness of evening they reflect on these contradictions. The songs once memorized spoke of knights who slew monsters and rescued maidens. Their life, meanwhile, is filled with tax records, muddy roads, and knees that never quite stop aching. They were promised glory. Instead, they received logistics. Yet, resentment does not fully take hold. Not entirely, because now and then, the code helps them remember who they once meant to be, before the world left its mark. They've seen knights twist the code to justify cruelty. They quote scripture while looting. They preach honor while sowing fear. And over time, it becomes easier to recognize them. Gleaming crests, hollow eyes. When possible, they step aside. And on rare days, when courage allows, they step forward to resist. They are not perfect, far from it. They've broken the code. They've struck those who had already yielded, taken what wasn't theirs, stayed quiet when truth was needed most. But they remember the ones who tried. The knight who held the gate so villagers could flee. The one who refused to burn a monastery, even under threat of exile. The one who died not surrendering, but praying. So in their own way they continue. They carry the code not in doctrine, but in practice. They reach for it each morning, like they would their sword, knowing by nightfall it may have slipped through their hands. But they reach for it all the same, because without it they are merely killers. And with it, just perhaps, they become something more. This is what chivalry means, not what the minstrels sing of, not what the clergy proclaim from their pulpits, but what they strive to live out, in a world that offers them every excuse not to. So they continue to ride, still held fast by the vow once sworn. They guard their lord, fight his battles, lay his dead to rest. Yet, they also share their food with a hungry squire when rations run low. They speak gently to the village elder who still remembers them as a boy. They stoop to return a dropped glove, even when no one else is there to see it. They are knights, and they remember the code not because it grants them power, but because it reminds them what power is meant to serve. Years from now, a boy will look up at them and ask what it truly means to live with honor. They won't quote scripture. They won't point toward embroidered banners. Instead, they'll offer him a sword and ask him to hold it steady. Then they'll ask whether he believes he can carry it through life without letting it fall upon the wrong soul. That, they'll say softly, is a good place to begin. Because in the end, chivalry is not about being flawless. It's about holding on, about falling, and rising again. About choosing quietly day after day not to become what they once swore to stand against. And with each of these choices, their blade lifts a little straighter. They've trained for years, carried swords long before ever swinging one, watched others fall before being allowed to charge, polished armor so often that the scent of oil and vinegar still lingers in dreams. But nothing prepares them for this. The moment the horns sound, their horse shifts beneath them, and the horizon fills with enemy banners and bodies. The battlefield is not a grand stage. It is not an arena for clean honour, nor a chessboard for noble tactics. It is a breathing, snarling thing, soaked in blood, churned into mud, ringing with metal and confusion. They could recite the names of ancient champions, repeat the codes of valour, the whispered rules handed down by candlelight from priest to page. But none of it will matter now. The road to war begins long before the swords are drawn. They've ridden for days, sometimes weeks, through storms, heat, sleep, and exhaustion. As the army grows, so does the stench, sweat, manure, and spoiling food blending into something thick and sickly. Feet blister, patience runs thin, jokes dry up, companions become quiet, withdrawn. Soon even the men smell like their horses, and so do they. Life in camp is brief and comfortless. Tents tremble in the breeze like wet flags. Fires give more smoke than warmth. Meals are whatever remains. Salted meat, coarse bread, wrinkled peas. Luck is rare. Hunger isn't. Clean water, if found, comes with questions about what unseen filth may lurk inside. Their armour bites with cold at dawn, burns by midday. They sleep in their boots. The sword never leaves reach. And then one morning they crest a hill, and there, across the field, an army waits, formed and ready. The field stretches ahead, enemy banners flapping, knights gleaming beneath the rising sun. This is the moment. Their commander shouts the signal, orders pass from mouth to mouth. Everyone nods, though few truly register the words. A knot forms in their stomach. They check the horse's girth strap one final time. They whisper a prayer, or go through the motions. In silence, they wonder how many will fall before dusk. And then it begins. The charge is not elegant. It's thunder, hooves pounding, earth splitting, lances tilt forward. Every heartbeat narrows toward collision. They lower their weapon and hope the figure riding toward them is just a little slower, a little more afraid. The impact rattles through their bones. Maybe they strike. Maybe they miss. Maybe they're struck instead. Maybe they fall. And if they do, they pray their body can rise again before the next wave crushes it beneath hooves. The noise is overwhelming. Screams, barked commands, iron clashing against iron, horses scream, men cry out. There is no rhythm, no clarity, only chaos. They fight in fragments. A blade flashes toward their face. They duck. A charging soldier lunges, their sword blocks by instinct. An axe slams into their shield and the jolt hums through their jaw. They do not think of glory. They think of inches. Every step forward feels like borrowed time. Every breath while standing is nothing short of a miracle. Mud grips their boots. Blood slicks the hilt. The air tastes of iron, of ash. There are no clean victories. Even survival means having looked into someone's eyes, seeing fear, feeling their final breath warm against the cheek as they fall. No one teaches them how to carry that. Sometimes they lose balance. A sudden strike sends them sprawling. Their visor loosens. The sky above blurs, blades and hooves spinning overhead. They crawl, reach, force themselves upright again. If their armour catches in the mud, they are helpless as an overturned beetle. If their squire finds them, they might be dragged free. If not, there are worse deaths than being forgotten. They see flickers, knights dismounted, peasants run through, banners crumpling. Familiar faces vanish in an instant, replaced by steel. There is no pause for mourning, only breath. only survival. And then, the next blow comes. Sometimes the melee dissolves completely, the lines vanish, orders crumble, they find themselves beside strangers, enemies mistaken for allies. Allies struck down by mistake. And in those moments the battlefield reveals its truest nature, not a contest of ideals or banners, but a wild storm where staying alive is the only purpose. If they survive, it ends not with fanfare, but with silence and pain. Their arms shake, their ears ring. If their horse still breathes, it trembles beneath its soaked tack. They limp back toward camp, strip the armor with trembling fingers, stare at their gloves, stained red, wondering if the blood is their own. Later they walk the broken ground. Crows have already arrived. Wounded men groan, unable to rise. They try to help. But there are too many. Some are given a mouthful of water. Others receive only a whispered farewell. Some, quietly, gently, they finish, because it is the kindest option left. Their boots are soaked through. They stop noticing the smell. Looters are already working the field, stripping bodies of rings, purses, boots, sometimes teeth. Dishonourable, perhaps, but necessary. War is costly. A dead knight's blade might feed a village through winter. They avert their gaze. They do not stop them. They find their companions, the ones who survived. And together they sit, beside the flicker of a dying fire, each of them. They sit in silence. Some tend to wounds, others simply stare. No one brags. No one reaches for wine. They all know better. Those who laugh too soon after battle are often the ones who weep when the fever comes. There's no celebration, only counting. How many lives were lost? How many banners taken? How many horses need replacing? How many squires never made it back? In the days that follow, the story is retold, refined. Minstrels turn it into song. Brave charges, heroic last stands. The Lord gives a speech. Priests speak of divine victory. And upon return, they're paraded through cheering streets. Petals fall from windows, children shout, they smile, wave and nod. But they remember the stench of that field, the eyes of the man they pierced, the scream of a friend dying behind a shattered shield. They do not forget, because this was the real battlefield, not the one from tales, filled with radiant armour and gallant triumphs. This one was wet with blood, deafening with chaos and thick with fear. Honour was a luxury, mercy rare, and survival a practiced art. They are no longer just knights, they are soldiers, hardened. And though they polish their gear and drill new squires, part of them remains behind, on that unnamed patch of earth, under a clouded sky, where breath steamed inside a blood-slick visor. That part never fully leaves. They rarely speak of it, not truly. When younger squires ask, they offer lessons in footwork, positioning, and focus, but they never describe the noise. They don't explain the trembling fingers, not from shame, but because words cannot contain it, and because deep down they worry the squires might still want it. Still they train them, remind them to keep shields up, even when weary, to double-check the straps on their greaves, to be mindful of every step. These small things, they save lives. They've seen what happens when they're missed. With time, their scars fade, on the surface at least. Underneath, the memories stay, not as pain, but as imprint. They recall the night they dragged from a ditch, crushed and still warm. They recall the silence before the trumpet. They recall the battlefield after, the broken ground, forever wrong. And still, they ride. Because someone must. Because war doesn't end, it only waits. They no longer chase glory, they search for clarity, for survival, and for any way to bring their brothers home. This is what it means to fight, not for colours or for songs, but for the man on the left and the one on the right. For the squire who still believes in legends, for the whispered prayer spoken even when faith has gone quiet. They were shaped by steel, but they were forged in the field. This is the brutal battlefield, and they have survived it. And in surviving, they've come to understand the cost of every patch of land, measured not by steps, but by lives. They make it through the first battle, and then another. And though war never truly ends, it does at times grow still. Armies dissolve, blades are set aside, banners are lowered. For a while there is calm. But a night without war is like a blade left resting too long, and idle steel begins to rust. So they turn to the next best trial, the tournament. Not a brawl, not quite a bloodbath, but close. A stage clash wrapped in colour, tradition, and the hope of gold. Where war brings chaos, the tournament brings choreography. Where the battlefield breeds legends, the list field shapes celebrities. It begins with a summons, sent only if their name carries weight, or if their lord's coin is generous. They're called to the list, a clearing near some thriving town where banners flap as high as the entry fees climb. They arrive with their squire, their armour gleaming, polished to a near blinding sheen. The warhorse is brushed and adorned, its mane plaited like a bride's hair. The fairgrounds take shape well in advance, wooden bleachers rising from the earth, stalls blooming with meat pies and tin tokens. Minstrels warm up their voices, eager to sell ballads before the first lance is shattered. Children dart between tents, calling out names of favoured knights. If their last joust had blood, cheers, or broken lances, their name may be among them. But don't mistake this for harmless sport. Tournaments are no gentler than war, only brighter lit and more politely introduced. Two events dominate, the melee and the joust. The melee comes first, a grand melee of men on horseback or on foot, charging across open ground in teams. It's said to resemble real combat, but it rarely obeys real combat's demands. The objective, unhorse, disarm, or bludgeon the foe into surrender, ideally without causing death. Not from mercy, but because dead men pay no ransoms. They step onto the field with their company, shield marked with their arms, heart hammering beneath the steel, horns sound, the crowd rises in cheer, visor drops, and they enter the storm. The fighting is no illusion. Blades may be dulled, but they still bruise, still break, bones snap, teeth scatter. Pride, always, is at risk. They strike, are struck, fall, rise again. Somewhere in the din their name is heard, shouted with triumph or with alarm, sometimes both at once. The melee ends when only a handful remain upright, or when the judges decide it's become too unruly for noble eyes. They leave the grounds limping, sweating, elated, or unconscious. If they impressed, their fame spreads. If they didn't, they act unbothered, while quietly feeling for bruises. Then comes the joust, the jewel of the tourney, one knight, one lance, one gallop. A narrow wooden rail, the tilt, separates them from the opponent. Both charge, full tilt, aiming to splinter their weapon against helm, shield, or chest. Points are tallied, helmets dented, ribs, now and then, are cracked. More than one knight has met death beneath the cheers. There's a pageantry to it, ceremony to rival any wedding. Their name echoes, trumpets flare. A lady ties a ribbon to their lance. They bow to the stands, salute the rival, take their place at the far end of the tilt yard, and then the banner drops. And all the silk and show vanish, swallowed beneath the thunder of hooves and the narrowing of the world to the single trembling tip of their lance, and the opponent ahead. When their lance struck true, the crack rang out like thunder, splinters burst into the air, and the crowd erupted in cheers. If they were unhorsed, they hit the ground with a punishing thud and remained there long enough to recall that the mud showed no mercy. Victory brought silver, but more crucially, it brought attention. Lords surveyed the field from above, scanning for skill, promise, or perhaps a marriage-worthy reputation. If one managed to impress the right eyes, their fortune could shift overnight. A name made in the lists might open doors to grander circuits, Paris, London, even Rome, at least so the stories claimed. But no two jousts were the same. Some held to honour, fair and tightly regulated. Others bled darker. Corruption whispered between tents, rumours of paid-off marshals, armour tampered with, or lances swapped for sharper tips. Every tournament harboured its grudges. Ancient feuds rekindled, old slights answered blade to blade. Injuries were inevitable, shoulders wrenched, wrists shattered, minds concussed. One learned fast not to remove their helm until both ears still heard. Even the onlookers weren't immune. Once, a broken lance flew into the stands and cost a merchant his eye. He still returned yearly, watching now from the safer side. Beyond the tilt, the tourney grounds resembled a festive fair. Vendors cried out, selling trinkets and steaming chestnuts. Scribes scribbled impromptu verses for coin. Young apprentices fenced with sticks, shouting famous knightly names, sometimes even theirs, if they'd spilled enough blood last time. As evening fell, bonfires lit the air, ale poured without pause, and ballads stretched every blow into legend. Nobles threw feasts, and knights attended, scrubbed clean, laced into tight doublets like punishment. There were bows, stiff wine, and stiffer conversation. A noblewoman might inquire about their lance technique, though her curiosity often hinted more at property or whispers of scandal, or both. Tournaments were arenas for politics as much as combat. Pacts were formed, rivalries reignited, behind goblets quiet wagers changed hands. A single win might lead to a title, a sworn bond, even an abrupt engagement. A loss, however, could linger long after the bruises healed. Yet for all the pageantry, the cost was heavy. Entry fees, gear repairs, feed for horses, tents and bribes. The coin vanished fast. Poor planning could bankrupt a knight. Some borrowed, others sold parcels of land. A few turned to darker trades, gambling, coercion, even fixed matches. Still they returned. Always they returned. There was something in it, the rush, the rhythm, that nothing else could match. The crowd knew their name. A single win in the lists could outweigh years spent patrolling borders. It elevated them. It declared their presence. It rendered them visible, and in a world ruled by perception, being seen meant everything. They rode in, they fought, they bled, they bowed. And when victory came, they smiled through split lips, for in that instant they were no mere servant in steel. They were the centerpiece. They were not at war, but they were immersed in battle. This was the tournament life. And they had endured it. By week's end, their bodies told the tale, bruises, scrapes, and slights. Their squire worked late beneath flickering lamplight, piecing the gear back together. And they, clutching watered wine, sat quietly, pretending their shoulder did not ache with every single movement. Breath! A bruised eye makes them more intriguing at supper. A slight limp adds a certain rugged charm. They don't mention the dread, the pause in their chest just before the lance descends, the fleeting thought of whether the next strike will be clean or conclusive. Instead it's tucked away, hidden under layers of armour and bravado. Fear, after all, is universal, voicing it is not. If fortune favoured them that day, they ride away with silver, a new token knotted on their saddle, and invitations to the next grand event. If not, they leave empty-handed, regrets weighing heavier than armour, already calculating how many more tourneys it will take to recover what was gambled chasing recognition. The journey home is more subdued than splendid. A few comrades ride along, one coughing blood quietly, another cradling a bandaged wrist that may never lift a lance again. The squires remain talkative, still caught in the spell of the spectacle, not yet grasping the true price of those cheering crowds. And so, bruised but breathing, they return to their manor or garrison, where duty patiently awaits. But for a brief span, they were more than warriors. They were wonder, they were story. And they'll do it all again. Because while war may shape a name, it is in tournaments that one carves it in gold. And sometimes that alone is enough. For a moment in the gaze of the people, they are not simply a knight. They are a symbol, a standard in motion. And for that one shining instant, everyone saw them blaze. The horns grow quiet, the fields clear, the clamour fades. But rest is not what follows. Instead comes something more intricate, responsibility. For they are not merely a knight in service, but also a vassal, a landholder, and the keeper of order. Whether their estate sprawls wide or clings to a hillside, it requires from them as much as any battle ever did. That land, such as it stands, is a patch of cottages, pastures, and people resistant to change. Often earned as a reward for service, it comes with duties, not to the soil, but to the souls who tend it. These villagers don't know them as warriors. To them, they are the one who demands wheat in autumn, dispatches bailiffs to resolve disputes, and occasionally rides through town as a reminder of whose banner flies. Their mornings no longer begin with sparring, but with numbers. The steward lists off accounts, grain tallied, dues collected, debts unsettled. They nod as though every line makes sense, though much of it does not. There's always something amiss. A vanished hog, a harvest cut short, someone passed on with unpaid dues. The solutions inevitably involve more ink than action, and fewer pigs. Then come the complainants. Peasants line up in the hall, grievances in hand. One cries that a goose was stolen, another that a cow crushed the barley. Children quarrelled, blows were exchanged. Beneath their coat of arms they sit, listening with the tired patience of someone who's once faced flying arrows and now secretly prefers them. Justice must be swift, or at least decisive. They nod. They fine. They send someone to examine fences. The villagers file out, mostly appeased. Disputes between peasants are manageable. Clashes between armed men are thornier. When two retainers argue over grazing lines or wandering livestock, blades may rattle, and they must intervene, not as a brother in arms, but as lord and judge. Calm, resolute, a figure of control. It's a balancing act, showing strength without provoking tempers. They manage, most of the time. And of course the ledgers still await. Taxes too must be gathered. Grain, wool, coin, or goods in kind. All are carefully accounted for, stored, and passed along to their liege lord. A portion remains behind to pay their men, support the estate, and handle daily needs. Another share, however, seems to vanish through the fingers of clerks, never to return. They quietly suspect that some of it finds its way into the bishop's wine cellar, or perhaps helps finance their lord's latest obsession with imported embroidery. But questioning the flow of feudal economics is as futile as questioning gravity. So they nod, sign the ledgers, and send the ox cart down the muddy road. Inspections follow. They ride slowly across their own fields, weaving between barley and flax, exchanging a few words with the reeve, the village's elected overseer, who reports labour shortages and quiet frustrations. The murmurs from hedgerows about rents, about levies, or about their fine scabbard, likely worth more than an entire plough, are heard but left unanswered. A smile, a nod, and they ride on. In truth, respect is more often preserved through distance than through fondness. Their hall must remain stocked and protected, the garrison trained, the outer walls regularly inspected, and the steward reminded, once again, that something in the grain cellar smells suspicious. They supervise the blacksmith, the cooper, and the baker. They sign off on repairs to the millstones, arrange timber supplies for the coming frost, and, each month, host a feast for tenants to preserve the illusion of harmony and shared loyalty. They arbitrate betrothals, approve apprenticeship pacts, and, from time to time, deliver judgments. Thieves might lose fingers. Poachers may pay in coin, or in sweat. The gallows stand tall, rarely used, but always visible. More than tools, they are warnings. Yet when laws are ignored too often, they do not hesitate to show why the structure stands. The church, of course, is a constant. A priest is assigned to their estate, and they fund his chapel's upkeep, not out of sheer devotion, but to ensure their name avoids being slandered from the pulpit. They attend Mass, murmur confessions for sins vaguely remembered, and offer donations that just happen to mirror their latest moral lapse. After all, giving in coin is simpler than living by virtue. Their household demands no less attention. The servants fluctuate between loyal, inept, and mildly rebellious. The cook fumes over the quality of the flour. The stable hand claims the hay is late, again. One chambermaid has grown a bit too familiar with a visiting knight, and they choose to look away, unless gossip or consequence follows. Their squire still forgets the saddle straps, leaves the sword exposed in rain, and once, in an unforgettable blunder, used lard to polish their boots. They scold him, drill him, threaten to pack him off to the monastery. And then, as always, end the day with a nod of approval. It's all the boy really seeks. If they are wed, their wife manages an empire of her own. The kitchens, the servants, the estate's ledgers. Her mind is sharp as tempered steel, and twice as unforgiving when provoked. She reminds them when rents are overdue, when a cousin's widow awaits a reply, and that they dozed through Mass. Again. They've learned to listen. They've also learned never to suggest she host the next feast, unless prepared for a 3-day dispute over linens. In lean seasons, they become both unwilling judge and unwilling supplicant. They petition their lord for relief, even as they ration the little that remains. For they know one truth. If the villagers starve, the manor weakens, and no fields are tilled by the dead. So they offer just enough to keep the hands moving, and just enough kindness to ensure resentment doesn't ignite into revolt. During times of abundance, they show generosity, though always with an audience. Loaves are handed out at the chapel's entrance, and coins are scattered on feast days. This is not pure kindness, it is performance. It keeps the peace. The villagers address them as "my lord." Yet it's uncertain whether the tone comes from reverence, quiet bitterness, or simple resignation, perhaps a mixture of all three. Though the peasants bow low, there's often a flicker of something else in their eyes. They pass by atop a heavy saddle, armour glinting in the sun. In their people's eyes, they are protector, burden, judge, and, at times, executioner. Now and then they host lesser nobles or travelling knights. These visits are equal parts courtesy and quiet diplomacy. They must appear affluent, yet not frivolous, commanding, yet never overreaching. A single misstep, a jest at the crown's taxes, or a poorly roasted pigeon might insult someone with more titles than patience. Navigating this world demands a balance of decorum, spectacle, and subtle strategy. But beyond the caution and protocol, there are moments of solitude. At dawn, they ride alone across fields damp with dew, nodding towards shepherds who've already been up for hours. In the heart of winter, they sit before the hearth, half listening as the steward mumbles through the ledgers, the crackle of the fire their only backdrop. A shared cup with their sergeant-at-arms reveals the truth. Both have backs that ache more than they used to. Though they rule the manor, they are tethered to it. Long absences are a risk. Bandits might raid, rot might set in, or an opportunistic cousin might press a claim. Even a brief visit to court feels like leaving a child unsupervised. Upon returning, something is always broken, a gate, a promise, a jaw. Still, there is quiet pride, not in titles, but in the web of order they maintain. They feed a village. They resolve conflicts before they spark feuds. They remember names, attend births, mourn the dead, and dance at harvest festivals, kneel beside the ill and ink marriage contracts. Their life intertwines with the rhythm of the land, beating with every season. This is the hidden role of a knight, not steeped in blood or valour, but in stewardship. It may never be sung in tavern ballads or etched into the chapel stone, but it is truth. A blade may defend a legacy, but only diligent care ensures it endures. Because once the weapons are put away and the echoes of battle fade, what lingers are the fields, the people, and the delicate peace built moment by moment. And when silence fills the hall, the ledgers are locked, and the sword rests on its mount. What remains is rarely discussed and seldom romanticized. The private self. One might think after campaigns, tournaments, and judgment days, they would collapse into sleep as easily as falling from a horse. But sleep eludes them. Comfort visits inconsistently. In a knight's world, rest is a rare treasure, and one that must often be earned. Negotiated rest was never guaranteed. Their bed was no feather-stuffed haven from later eras, merely a wooden frame padded with straw or wool, draped in linen that forever smelled of dust and weariness. They shared it perhaps with a spouse, perhaps not, or with their armour laid beside them, ticking faintly as warmth ebbed from the metal. They did not sleep straight through the night. That wasn't how the world worked then. Rest came in fragments, broken by prayer calls, patrol rounds, or the dull pulse of old wounds that flared up as the hearth's glow dimmed. Some nights they were called to settle squabbles in the barracks. Other nights they simply lay awake, reliving a botched joust, or wondering if the steward had once again lied about the granary. Still, it wasn't all darkness and ache. Laughter lived here too, and warmth not born of fire. Their hall served as more than a court. It was home stage, gathering place. Songs drifted from the hearth. A bard might pass through, spinning tales of distant wars or hopelessly lovesick royalty. Though they knew the endings, they still listened. Familiarity, after all, soothed in its own way. Games filled the quieter hours, dice, chess, backgammon. They cheated now and then when no eyes watched, or lost flamboyantly, and blamed it on the wine, the firelight, or the table's suspicious tilt. Laughter rang out, cups refilled, Evenings with feasts were rowdy, not regal banquets, but crowded, jubilant scenes, with meat torn from bone, spilled ale soaking floor rushes, and joy echoing toward the rafters. They sat at the high table, not far from the fire, drinking with their men, raising toasts to squires, flinging scraps to dogs beneath benches. Jugglers tumbled, fools jested in near blasphemies about the clergy or foreign lords. Laughter, perhaps too loud, reminded guests that they could take a joke. It was a delicate balance, held together by roast pork and week-old bread. Some nights were quieter. A servant plucked soft melodies on the lute. Their wife sat nearby, humming forgotten hymns while embroidering. They drifted off by the fire, waking only when logs collapsed in a spray of sparks. For one quiet moment, stillness settled. The house slept early. Servants vanished long before dawn. The squire lingered sometimes, maybe seeking praise, advice, or company. He was sent off kindly. He'd earned his rest, even if the master had not. There were nights they wandered the manor, habits from long campaigns. Doors were checked, shadows scanned, ears strained for trouble. Nothing ever appeared, yet pacing through the halls reminded them. The walls still stood, the fire still burned, and they were still there. When storms rolled over the hills, sleep fled altogether. Wind howled through shuttered panes, beams creaked like old bones. They remembered nights huddled beneath cloaks beside a horse in some forgotten field, and reminded themselves this was better. Some nights they almost believed it. Private life bore private thoughts. These were harder to tame than squires or fields. Was the land truly theirs, or merely held until someone wealthier laid claim? They thought of the men they'd slain, some faces still vivid, others mercifully faded. They wondered about their father, whether he too had felt this same quiet tug between. On better nights they turned to writing, or at least tried. They scratched out lines on worn parchment, recording accounts or composing formal letters to neighbouring lords. Now and then they even ventured into poetry. It was dreadful, but the steward always feigned admiration, and their wife quietly removed the worst verses before guests might stumble upon them. When visitors arrived, that sliver of privacy disappeared. The hall was swept, the finer wine uncorked, and every smile rehearsed. They laughed at tired jokes, nodded through endless tales of hawks that soared higher, or horses that outran anything in their own stables. It was a role they played well, smiling, listening, humouring. But once the final guest departed, once boots stopped echoing through stone corridors, they allowed themselves the rarest indulgence: silence. Seated by the hearth, a cooling cup in hand, they let the quiet settle around them. No strategies to plot, no levies to tally, only the pop of embers and the slow, steady rhythm of breath. Their body was a history written in scars. They knew which shoulder ached in frost, which rib protested rain, the knotted finger from a tournament in Kent, the line along the thigh from a border skirmish. These weren't complaints, they were companions, old and constant. A squire once asked if they ever truly slept well. They smiled and replied, "Sometimes, when the hearth burns low and the dogs keep quiet." A gentle lie, one told to reassure, but the dreams persisted, vivid, odd, unshakable. Sometimes they stood mid-battle, reaching for a sword that refused to be found. Other nights they wandered through childhood halls, now crumbling and silent, their name lost in the silence. Once they dreamed they were soaring above the rivers and fields of their manor. That time they had woken smiling. Not every moment carried grandeur. Most did not. Mud often trailed into the great hall. A loose board always caught someone's boot. A pail spilled, a loaf charred, a cough in the night made them sit up straight, ears pricked, breath held. These were the fibres of life, what lay between armour and orders. On feast days, that private world met the public. There was music. Some called it dancing. They often watched more than joined, but sometimes a hand would pull them into a spinning ring of arms and laughter. Their steps were clumsy. They laughed. Their wife laughed louder. And for a fleeting instant the servants smiled too. Gifts were given: cheese, a coin, a chunk of bread still warm from the oven. Children darted across the courtyard shrieking in play. Elders dozed beneath the sun, feigning knees that didn't groan. For one gentle afternoon, no one was judged or taxed. They watched not as lord, not as knight, but simply as someone present. A man, quietly thankful. A dog's head found rest against their boot. They reached down, smiling, and scratched gently behind its ears, and let their shoulders ease. They feel tired, though not with the weariness that follows battle. This is a heavier weight, the kind born from shouldering not just swords, but responsibility, land, and meaning. Still they endure. There is a rhythm to it all, a quiet, persistent peace that exists between the duties. It is not comfort nor ease, but something close to purpose. This quieter life of a knight is more challenging than war, for though records preserve tales of banners and victories, it is these unnoticed hours, the half-sung songs, the unfinished notes, the silence of a slumbering hall, that truly reveal who they were. They rise at first light, joints stiff and cold, burrowing deeper than before. A nod from the steward. A quieter squire than in years past trails behind. Nothing feels different until stepping outside. Then something is unmistakably changed. Not in sky or wind, but in the pulse of the place itself. Fewer hooves echo on the road. Fewer hands lift in greeting. The banners remain, yet they sag lower than they used to. What once was vital now feels ceremonial. They still ride, still wear armour, still guide young squires eager for greatness. But even those eyes now drift toward engineers with their plans, toward captains training ranks with pikes and the fire of gunpowder. The future no longer charges on horseback. The first time they see a musket fired in true conflict, it seems an error. Absent are grace, artistry, or honour. Just smoke, a crack, and someone gone. From the hillside, surrounded by their men, they observe and say nothing. Later, they still clean the sword. Habit, perhaps, or silent resistance. The lord who once summoned them with urgency for border troubles now sends parchment only in cold seasons. Grain counts, tax figures, reports of peasant departures. Battles persist but are now directed by those with charts, not chainmail. Their presence has become courtesy, their voice at court tradition. The gathering of old knights grows rare, familiar names once revered now slip from memory. Those who remain move slowly, their emblems dulled. A shared nod replaces spoken recognition. No one dares name what all understand. Armour once bright now stands quiet between uses. Still the squire oils it, more from respect than necessity. It feels heavier, not in mass but in recollection. Every dent is a memory. Every rivet recalls a day once vivid, now fading into legend. They wear it on occasion, for ceremony, for pageantry. Once a child asked if it was real. They no longer correct such questions. When it's called old-fashioned, they smile. The formality endures, though even it begins to fray. The feasts. Days are quieter now. Fewer nobles arrive, and fewer heralds call out names with the same vigour they once had. The songs still sing of the days of knights, but always as if they belonged to another time. They listen, nod, raise a cup, and smile politely when glances fall on them during verses that begin with, "In days of yore." In solitude, they walk the grounds of their estate, observing tenants at work. The fields are tilled with updated tools. Some of the workers now carry coins bearing the king's likeness. Others clutch paper permits, receipts, and even letters, as literacy begins to take root. The blacksmith's boy aspires to be a clerk. The miller's daughter speaks of lessons. They tell themselves these are good signs, yet the thought lingers. They are no longer the figure young boys dream of becoming. They continue to train the youth, still wield the blade, though it's more taxing. A stiffness creeps into the shoulders when the cold sets in. Breath shortens climbing hills. The sword feels heavier, though it hasn't changed. Rising requires a grunt now, and the squire, no longer a child, regards them as they once regarded their own mentor, half admiration, half anticipation. Even in battle, their place has changed. They no longer lead the charge. They are asked instead to watch, to counsel. Their strength now lies in perspective, not pursuit. They appreciate the honour, but part of them yearns for the thunder of hooves, the roar of engagement. Now they understand. The age of the night draws to a close. Not with a cry, but with a quiet shift. Gunpowder cares little for lineage, and military formations hold no regard for valor. What was once a gallant cavalry strike is now a target, easy for the cannon and musket. They've witnessed it, counted the fallen. They try not to dwell in resentment. After all, every era yields to another. The Romans once thought their roads eternal. Emperors believed their names would outlast the marble. Yet even those stones find new lives, rebuilt into barns and sanctuaries. There is mourning still, subtle, steady. It surfaces when the sword invites curiosity instead of awe. When a banner, once a symbol of glory, is noted only for its age. When their horse, loyal and proud, passes, and a stable hand asks if they'll replace it with a mule. More sensible, he says. They remind themselves that they are fortunate. They lived through the height and decline of their kind. They earned their land, their title, their place among peers. They returned home. Many never did. Occasionally they take the long path past old battlefields. Today they are quiet farmlands. A peaceful grove now grows where once archers stood. Once there had been a ridge where the cavalry gathered. They dismounted and walked the slope, boots pressing into the softened earth. A marker stone stood there, worn, leaning, its names long forgotten by most. But they remembered. In the quiet of night the dreams arrived more often. Not always nightmares, though some surely were. Just vivid flashes, moments once believed buried. A lance snapping, a friend's laughter. The colour of the sky above a distant battlefield. They would wake chilled, puzzled why the memory cut sharper than any blade. They wrote more now, not directives or chronicles, but reflections. They tried to give shape to what it had been, the heft of armour before sunrise, the nerves before a joust, the scent of wet earth after rain. They hoped to capture what it meant to be a knight, not the stuff of ballads, but of reality. And who it was meant for, they weren't sure. Perhaps a young lad who might one day discover it, tucked away in a dusty chest. Or maybe for no one at all. Visitors still came. They asked their questions. Was it glorious? Was it noble? Cautious they replied, sometimes on the better days. But it was also cold, deafening, and lonesome. They explained that knighthood had meant service, loyalty to a liege, to the soil, to an idea. And at rare moments, when the wind shifted just right, it felt as though it touched something more. They walked with a cane now. The squire, now grown, paced beside them, feigning ease. He still called them Sir. That honorific was allowed. It cost nothing, yet offered much. It echoed. Even if the era was fading, they remained its remnant. One evening, without fanfare, the sword was handed over. No ceremony, just stillness. The younger man accepted it with reverent hands, wide-eyed and wordless. He didn't speak thanks. He didn't need to. And so their presence faded, not in defeat, but in cadence. The halls fell quieter, the hearth lower, their tasks grew lighter. But the land carried on. People toiled. And in that lull between seasons, something akin to peace arrived. Let the storytellers craft verses of dragons and treasure. Let the artist paint brilliant charges and gilded spurs. They would remember the chilled mornings, the crooked grins, the bruised ribs and rough laughter, the scent of soaked horses, the sting of cheap ale. That too was knighthood. And it had been enough. They didn't know what the world would become, only that it would. Castles would tumble, cannons would thunder, old customs would fold into new doctrines, new codes and stitched uniforms. But maybe, just maybe, in a chapel or court, a tapestry would endure. A child might point to the worn figure in one corner, armoured and modest, and ask, who was that? And perhaps someone would remember, not the triumphs or emblems, but the person. And that would be enough.